Before we go to episode 14, where part 1 leaves off, we learned that the Starlight Girls who ran away is now at the Misfits concert. So now they're on top of the scaffolding, just like what Danny, who got thrown out of the house since part 1, did. And of course, things look bad for Chrissy because she fell off the scaffolding. So part 2 picks up where part 1 leaves off. But good news for Danny, he manages to save Chrissy, and good thing he did so. So now that the concert is over, the Mistress concert that is, that's when the girls meet up with Danny outside the stadium to thank him for saving Chrissy the way he did. And they introduce themselves as the Starlight Girls, who previously ran away from Starlight Mansion since part 1. And Danny, however, said that in his case he ran away too, but that's not exactly the case. Remember Mick from part 1? He catches Danny in the act because he's the one that stole the concert tickets back in part 1, and that cost $50. So when Chrissy agrees to pay Mick, that's when Danny says that it wasn't necessary, and that's when Mick agrees to have the girls and Danny spend the night in the bus. And that's when Mick and the girls and Danny had met up with Ramon, who's Mick's best friend. And that's when they were having dinner with George sandwiches in the back of the bus, and that's when the girls and Danny were having a conversation with each other. Back at the Starlight Mansion, it's now the morning of August the 3rd of 1986 and the night of the benefit concert that the Holograms was supposed to be performing at. And that's when one of the Starlight girls who met up with Jerica said that there's a man that wants to see her right away. It was Jack from the CPS. Now remember, Jack was the same guy that Possessed had telephoned to since part 1. Anyway, Jericho was about to answer Jack's question of where the Starlight Girls went. That's when Ashley interrupted them and said, "There's good news. There's a benefit concert that's coming up later." Well, that convinces Jack, but gives Jericho another chance, but said if the Starlight Girls aren't back by then, that means he's shutting down the Starlight House permanently. That means for Jericho, it's a serious problem. On the rooftop of Misfits music, and the Misfits are in hang gliders. So even though Roxy isn't sure if this idea would work, and that's when Tagrat at the same time gave the laser gun to Possessed and showed her how it works. And that's when they jumped off the roof and raining posters at the same time with their song, "You Ought to See the View from Here." While that is going on at Jericho's upstairs office at Starlight Music, that's when they saw hang gliders coming. Back with Stormer and, of course, Roxy, good news they landed in the park safely, but they realized that Pizzazz was missing. So after Eric met up with Stormer and Roxy and realized where Pizzazz went, and that's when Tech told him that she's with the laser gun, in which Eric got upset with. Back with Pizzazz of the Misfits, she was busy vandalizing Jim's billboard on the roof and cuts it in half to cause the billboard to fall and break the window. Luckily, the holograms got out of the way when the window broke. Well, back with Jerica, she decided to take matters in her own hands and projected a holographic bird to chase after Pizzazz of the Misfits. Well, luckily, Pizzazz, however, with the hang glider out of control, she lands in the water and intact, but the bad news, the hang glider crashed into a tree at the nearby park. So meanwhile there, not only was the hang glider damaged, but so was Tech Rat's gadget. When Eric ran up to Pizzazz, well, luckily for her, she's okay, but went up to Tech Rat after he got upset with her. That's when she threatened to punch out Tech Rat's light if he says another word about the gadget being broken. Back with the five kids who spent the night on the school bus, and that's when Chrissy still insisted for Danny to pay the $50 to give to Mick and Ramon. But then Mick and Ramon told the girls to go away. But after the three Starlight girls did, that's when Chrissy had a second thought and decided to help Danny, with Dondra and Bonnie catching up with her. Meanwhile, Tech just told Eric the good news that the jammer's all ready, and after a quick demonstration, that's when Eric seemed impressed with it. So meanwhile, at the stereo shop, that's when Mick and Ramon had to send Danny out on a mission, but on the way out, that's when Chrissy had to stop Danny from doing the unthinkable. After Danny realizes that what Chrissy said was true, that shoplifting is bad, that's when Mick decides to threaten him. After Danny was convinced otherwise, Danny went inside of the shop and took something. And then what the owner saw what had happened, he stopped him and along with Mick, Ramon, and the girls who were also outside. So after the owner called the police on all five of them, that's when the five of them ran off with the police chasing them with the hologram song, Run Like the Wind. After the song ended, they reached at the end of the alley where there's a fence. Chrissy makes it over first, then Dondra, then Bonnie, and when Danny tries to climb over it, it causes the crease to fall on the first officer that had just arrived on the scene. But luckily for Danny, he managed to save the officer's life by getting the crate off of his chest. After saving the officer's life, Danny was the last to make it over to join up with the girls, and that's when the second officer arrested Ramon, who's Mick's partner. And that's when, after Mick and Ramon are arrested, it was now time for the girls and Danny to leave. Meanwhile, the Stover Stadium, while the benefit concert was ready to begin later that evening, that's when Jack came back. And that's when Layla, Ashley, and the rest of the Starlight Girls are wondering why hasn't the rest of the three Starlight Girls arrived yet. So when Jim changed the jerk at the top to Jack and then asked the question, couldn't this wait till the benefit concert? So after Jack agreed and told Jack that it's her last chance and that the Starlight Girls aren't back by then that means the Starlight House is finished. And so after Jack left, that's when Jerka embraced this Rio and hoping that Bonnie, Chrissy, and of course Dondra will come back soon. Back with the Starlight Girls and Danny who were having lunch at the burger place, that's when Chrissy suggested to have the lunch paid, but Danny said it wasn't necessary. That's when Bonnie suggested that Danny should live with the Starlight Girls, but Dondra dismisses that suggestion. And that's when Tony, who works at the burger place, who overheard the conversation, said that there's a runaway house and there's a phone number. And so after lunch, Danny suggested by Tony to contact the runaway house. Back with the Misfits, they had just arrived at the music awards ceremony, just the way it's planned, and along with Eric. Back with the Starlight Girls and Danny, after finishing their lunch at the burger place, they followed Tony's suggestion and arrived at a Raven house. But by the time they arrived and knocked on the door, there was no answer. But when the four of them saw a car pulling out, that's when Danse comes out and meets up with Danny and the Starlight Girls. After Danse was asking Danny if he would like to see Jim at the concert at the Sulphur Stadium, at first he thought about it and then he reluctantly agreed, so all five of them left the Raven House. Back at the Sulphur Stadium, the Starlight Girls are waiting for Bonnie, Dondra, and Chrissy to return. Jack showed up later on and so did Jack Rat. Meanwhile, backstage, Jerica changed into Jim, and that's when she heard a knock on the door along with her bandmates. It's Dance, but she's not alone because the Starlight Girls and Danny were with her. The first thing Dance did was to apologize to Jim for being late. Dondra apologized next for getting Bonnie and Chrissy involved and have them run away so much. Jim said that there's no need and she's the one who should apologize for ignoring them. She shouldn't have done it. Long story short, after the Misfits had won the music awards back at the Stouffer Stadium, that's when everybody was there. And the benefit concert was about to begin, and that's when Tag Rat, as always, did what he did back at the Starlight Mansion, is to turn on the jammer to expose Jerica in front of the entire audience, because that's when Jerica and the rest of the girls should have known that it was all part of Eric's plan. Good news for Kimber, she rushed Jim off the stage before she became Jerica. Back with the Misfits and Eric, who just won the award, are now in the limousine. That's when Pizzazz had suggested to have the chauffeur take the Misfits to the chauffeur stadium. And when Eric asked her why, that's when Pizzazz says she couldn't wait to see the reaction on Jen's face when Pizzazz shows her the award, or in Pizzazz's case, to brag about it. Back at the Stouffer Stadium, just when things are looking hopeless, that's when Danny saw Tech Rat in the audience. And when Danny stepped closer, that's when Tech Rat panicked and says, "Don't touch me." And that's when Tech Rat ran off. And when Tech Rat ran off, that's when Danny got his hands on Tech Rat's gadget, and that's when everything went back to normal, including some equipment. And of course, more than ever, Jericho changed back into Jim. And just like what had happened earlier back at Starlight Mansion, everything is back to normal. So Jim went out on stage and performed his plan with dance, doing the dance routine. And what better way to do is with the hologram song "Friend or Stranger." It was during this song that Chrissy, Bonnie, and Dondra went to the rest of the Starlight Girls and they hugged each other. Danny, who was thanked by Rio for saving the day, and after all, Danny deserved most of the credit. When Eric and the Misfits showed up backstage minutes later, at first, Pizzazz was going to brag to Jim about how she and her bandmates won the award, but instead, she doesn't say a word. She was shocked in silence. And when the song came to an end, not only are all the Starlight Girls are back together again, so you know what this means. Jack doesn't have to investigate Jerka after all, so you know what this means. Starlight House is back together again. So when the audience cheered, you know what this means? That means the benefit concert for the Raven House was a success thanks to Jim and her bandmates. And as for Pizzazz of the Misfits, she drops the statuette on the floor and it broke into pieces. So that ends episode 14 and part 2.